Hey everybody, my name is Brent. Welcome to the Ogden Nature Center. Thanks for coming to study with us today. We're going to talk all about Utah's ecosystems. You've probably heard this word before, ecosystem. And this word can be broken down into two parts. Eco actually means home. And you're probably at home watching this right now, so think about what makes your home a good home. The second part of that word, system. Some of you might even have a PlayStation or a Nintendo 64 at home. That's a kind of system, right? There's all these wires that are connected. They work together to make that thing work. If you zoom back and look at the whole word again, ecosystem, this is where animals and plants interact and live. We've got food for animals. Things eat each other, right? There's places to find shelter. There's water they can get. There's soil and fungus. There's all these different connections that are happening in ecosystems. Ecosystems can be massive. They can be as big as the whole world, or they can be as small as a little tiny puddle in your backyard. So, we're going to zoom back out and look at Utah again. And we're actually going to build Utah using this big puzzle that I've got. Now, Utah has three ecosystems. And the first one I want to talk about is the desert. And actually, all of Utah is a desert. So can you think right now, what actually makes a desert a desert? A lot of you are probably saying it's really hot and they're really dry. That's the most important part of being a desert. But that's not the only ecosystem that we've got in Utah. We've also got mountains. And if you live around here in Ogden, you've probably seen the Wasatch Mountains, which are part of the Rocky Mountains, actually. But it's not the only mountain range we have. We also have the Uinta Mountains that run east and west. And as you go up, well, you'll notice it gets a little bit cooler up there. If you look outside the window right now, there's tons of snow in the mountains. Our last ecosystem that we're going to talk about are wetlands. And we're really lucky in Utah to have a massive wetland called the Great Salt Lake. And lots of animals, and there are quite a few plants that live in these wet areas. Okay, so now what we're going to do, we're going to talk about a few of the living things that call these ecosystems home. And you're going to help me out. I've got 4 different living things I'd like to show you. I'll bring them a little closer to you. You can have a look. We've got some sagebrush here. We've got a cottontail rabbit. We've got a golden eagle. And finally, we have a moose. Okay, let's start with the golden eagle. Now, a lot of times, I go for a walk in the mountains, and I actually see this bird soaring high over my head. They can find a lot of food there in the mountains, like a deer. They can actually prey on deer. It's a really big bird of prey there. And there are a lot of deer that live in the mountains. Let's take a look at our plant now, our sagebrush. And I'm going to put that over here in our desert. These plants can actually do really, really well without having a lot of water. So we know that deserts are really dry. It's a great place for sagebrush to be found. Cottontail rabbit. I'm going to say the wetland because, well, there's a lot of plants and these guys are herbivores. They love plants. And so do moose. Moose love plants too. In fact, they can go for a swim. They're really good swimmers. And they can scrape up all the vegetation at the bottom of the pond and scoop it up with those antlers there. So there, we've got quite a few living things in different ecosystems. Now, you might be sitting at home thinking, I don't agree with you, Brent. I think some of these living things could be put in other places. Where do you think they could be put? Let's revisit the golden eagle. Golden eagles, well, they can fly, right? So they can actually move between these ecosystems. And I gotta say, they also really love to eat cottontail rabbits. Where was the cottontail rabbit at? In the wetland. So wherever the cottontail rabbit is, you would find the golden eagle as well. We also got our sagebrush down here in the desert, but you might have heard me say before, all of Utah is a desert. So there's a lot of mountains in Utah. You can find sagebrush in the mountains. You can find them near wetlands as well. And these two herbivores. This cottontail rabbit, I should be more specific, is a desert cottontail rabbit. find in the desert, wouldn't you? Our moose could be found in these places. Often I'll see them in the mountains on my walks, just like when I see golden eagles. So these animals and plants can be found in all these different ecosystems. There's no fine line or boundary where these ecosystems start and end. They overlap, they connect, and they rely on each other. So today, we're going to talk about each of these ecosystems a little more specifically. Okay, let's get started. We're going to talk about deserts first. Okay, we're going to talk about deserts as ecosystems first in here. So as you mentioned before, deserts are really hot, right? So like the Mojave Desert near Las Vegas or the Sahara in Africa. But deserts can also be really, really cold. There's one down the southern hemisphere, it's an entire continent. That's right, Antarctica is also a desert. What makes a desert truly is how dry it is and how much precipitation it gets. Precipitation is a pretty big word, right? You've probably heard this word before. What it means is the water that's coming from the sky in the form of either rain, snow, or sleet. And deserts, frankly, don't get a lot of it. There's two types of deserts in the world. We've got arid deserts and semi-arid deserts. Arid deserts don't get very much water at all. They only get about 10 inches of water a year. A whole year, that's how much they get. It's not very much at all. Semi-arid deserts get a little bit more. They get between 10 and 20 inches of rain a year, which is about 2 rulers worth. But it's still not a ton when you think rainforests, they get hundreds of inches of rain a year. Now here's a country that you're very familiar with, the United States. And we live out in the western United States, the Intermountain West. And you can see we have quite a few different deserts in this area. Some of these are semi-arid, some of them are arid. So the most important part for these animals and plants, the most important thing, is when they find this water, they've got to defend it and they have to store it to stay alive. So let's talk about plants first. And you guys will know the classic plants, right? I'm sure everybody at home is yelling, cactus! Yes! I wouldn't want to touch one of those. They look pretty sharp, don't they? Cactus have fascinating adaptations. They have really fat trunks so that they can store all that water in there. And they have really shallow roots. So when precipitation does come by, they can just soak up that water as it arrives. But of course, they have those sharp spines too, right? Those spines, well, they're actually the leaves of the cactus, believe it or not. And these leaves, well, they do keep other animals away from getting their precious water, but the leaves also prevent transpiration. That's another huge word. Transpiration is when plants lose their water through their leaves. So trees with really, really, really big leaves, well, they lose a lot of water through these leaves. But if you've got skinny little leaves, like the cactus does, you can keep a lot of that water inside. Okay, here's another plant that I'd like to introduce you to. This is the mesquite tree. And they have a taproot underground that can go hundreds of feet deep. It's probably taller than your house. That helps them to get the water that's way deep down underground called groundwater. It helps them to survive in the desert. Lastly, we've got to talk about the creosote bush. This bush has so many adaptations that help it live in the desert. First of all, their roots spread way out over a large distance where they can access a lot of water when it rains. They also have really waxy leaves, which prevent that transpiration from happening like we talked about with the cactus. Now, they also will drop their leaves if they don't get a lot of water in a certain amount of time, and that helps to prevent that transpiration from also happening. They can go a very long time without water, 2 years. You and me, if we don't have water for a couple of days, we're in trouble. These plants can go years without water. So those are just a couple of the plants that can make it in such a harsh environment. Okay, now I want to introduce you to my friend Laser, who is a desert tortoise, and we'll talk all about his adaptations. Okay, as promised, we're going to talk about my friend Laser, who is a desert tortoise. He's from the Mojave Desert, And he's got some fascinating adaptations that help him to live. So I want you to take a second and take a good look at him and think about what you notice. You notice he's trying to leave the program? Laser's got scales all over his body, like all reptiles do. And these scales are really important for him to actually keep moisture inside of his body. You remember when we talked about the creosote bush, the waxy leaves? Scales kind of act like that for the tortoise. Keeps the water inside his body. He's also got the classic hard shell that turtles and tortoises have. For protection, right? So predators don't eat him. But also helps him to camouflage with other rocks that you might find in the desert. There's a couple other things that's worth mentioning that you might not have seen. He's also cold-blooded. That's not something you can see. Cold-blooded means he can't make heat. You and me, we're pretty lucky. We are warm-blooded animals, so when we're hot, we sweat. When we're cold, we shiver. He can't do any of those things. If he wants to warm up, he has to come out of his burrow and go onto a hot rock. If he wants to cool down, he can go into his burrow. In fact, he's got some really cool claws on his front and back legs. You might be able to see them here, which he needs to help him dig those burrows. He spends most of his life underground, actually, when it's really, really hot in the desert. He'll go find some time in there. He'll also, which I just learned, he will dig catch basins. Basically, he digs a little bowl in the dirt, which will collect some rainwater when it does precipitate. And he can go and have himself a drink. Pretty clever. He also has a really good sense of smell and sight. And he can sense things that smell very strongly and are very colorful. What do you think in the desert would smell strongly and be colorful? If you said flowers, you're right. And that's what he loves to eat. He's an herbivore, so he only eats plants and he gets a lot of the water that he needs from those flowers. Okay, the last adaptation that I want to talk about with Laser is something called the gular horn. I'm going to prop him up here to show it to you. Right underneath of his neck here, you can see there's an extension of his shell. That's a weapon. Actually, all male and female tortoises have these, but it's the male that has the most pronounced gular horn. And they use these to flip over other male desert tortoises. These guys are really territorial. When they find some water or some flowers or even a mate, they don't want anybody else getting in their way. So they'll go and flip another tortoise over with that gular horn. So that helps them live in the Mojave Desert. All right, next up we're going to go talk about mountains as ecosystems. Thanks, Laser. All right, next up we're going to talk about mountains as an ecosystem. And lucky enough, in Ogden, we're right next to the Wasatch Mountains. So let's take a look at those really quick. So what did you notice when you looked at the Wasatch? Did you see a ton of snow? Did you notice there's no snow down here? It's pretty clear that it's a lot colder up there. In fact, every 1,000 feet that you go up in elevation, it's 10 degrees cooler. So I got a little math problem that I'd like to do with you guys. Okay, so here at the Ogden Nature Center, I want you to imagine it's a really hot day. It's 100 degrees down here, and we're at an elevation of 4,500 feet. Now, imagine you decide to go up for a hike, maybe in the mountains where it's 7,500 feet. Remember that fact I shared with you, that it goes down 10 degrees every 1,000 feet? What would the temperature be up there? If you said 70 degrees, you got it right. Well done. There's a couple other things that make mountains very unique environments. So for example, there's less oxygen up there. I love watching videos of people climbing Mount Everest. They've got these oxygen tanks on, don't they? You can hear them breathing really heavily. There's not as much oxygen up there. So animals and plants have to figure out how to account for that. It's also a lot shorter growing season. So it's April down here at the Ogden Nature Center. And well, you see, like I said, there's no snow, but there's tons up there. that snow might last for another few months before spring or summer arrives up there. Okay, another important thing is to mention that the sun is actually a lot stronger the higher you go in elevation. There's a lot less atmosphere up there for sunlight to penetrate, so you got to make sure you put a lot more sunscreen on when you're up at elevation. So, plants and animals have to adapt to the environment up there. One of the plants that I want to talk about now is a plant called aspen. Okay, quaking aspen is actually the state tree of Utah. And you've heard quaking, right? They actually look like they are quaking when a breeze comes by and flutters their leaves. And this is actually an adaptation, helps them to live. Most trees can photosynthesize just with one side of their leaves. But because quaking aspen have the ability to spin their leaves when a breeze comes along, helps them to create more food, more sugar for the tree to survive. Okay, what else can they do? They also have a green trunk, which can help them to photosynthesize as well. They've got chlorophyll all over the trunk, which is the chemical that helps them to absorb that sunlight. So even after they drop their leaves, like they do in the fall and the winter, they can still photosynthesize in winter as well. Not a lot of trees can do that. If you've ever touched an aspen tree, you'll notice it's very powdery and chalky feeling. Those are the dead cells that are left on the trunk, which actually act like a sunscreen. Remember I mentioned that the sun can be really intense at elevation. So those dead cells protect the trunk of the tree as well. Those are fantastic adaptations that the aspen has. But you know what else they can do? They can clone themselves. Man, I wish I could do that. A little sapling will come right out of the ground, but the roots will continue to spread through the soil and shoot up another little sapling, and another, and another, and another, until there's a whole forest of just one tree. And this is an example of that. This is called pando, which is one of the largest living organisms in the world. It's right here in Utah. Pretty cool, huh? So, there's plants, of course, in the mountains, but we've also got some animals that I want to talk about. Okay, now I want to talk with you guys about an animal that calls the mountains home. But first, we need to visit an animal that lives in the desert. This is a jackrabbit. It's no surprise that they have these huge ears. It actually helps them to live, right? They can hear really well with these ears. But these huge ears also cool them down. It's kind of like having an air conditioner or a swamp cooler on your head. Nice breeze comes through the desert. Actually cools the rest of the jackrabbit down. They're also really fast, right? It's no surprise either. A lot of things like to eat them. So they need to run as fast as they can to get away. Take that jackrabbit, put it in the mountains. Now, do they need those huge ears to cool them down? No. And if they move around as fast, it takes a lot of oxygen. And, well, that's not going to be any good for the animal either. So the animal that we're going to put up there has some different body parts. It's the pika, which is the cousin to the rabbit. It's a lot smaller. It's about the size of this little otter toy that I have in my hand. Pretty cute little guys. And they have to take advantage of a really short growing season up there. As we mentioned before, the snow stays up in the mountains for most of the year. So this pika has to take advantage of just a couple of months to get a ton of grass. Look at all this grass I got right here. This is a pound of grass. They need 60 pounds over 2 months. That's kind of crazy. They got to get as much as they can in just a couple of months. And remember, the animal's only this size. This little guy has to survive on what he finds in mountain meadows and under trees and things. So another really important thing I want to mention about pikas is that they are a keystone species, which means other living things depend on these guys to survive. And I was just mentioning mountain meadows. The pika go through these meadows and clear out all the dead grass and cache them away to survive in the winter. And then in the spring, new things can germinate and grow in the meadow because the pika cleared all that dead stuff out. If the pika's not around to do that, things are not going to grow as well. So these guys are really, really important to have in those mountain ecosystems. All right, guys. Lastly, we're going to go talk about wetlands as ecosystems. Join me down at Arrowhead. Okay, lastly, we're going to talk about our wetland as an ecosystem. And before I start yapping away, take a look. What do you notice out there? Do you hear anything? There's lots of things to take in here. There's tall grasses and cattails. I can hear chorus frogs chirping away out there. There's a lot of things going on in our wetland here. And there's some important vocabulary words that I want to teach you that'll help you learn about it. So right here, we are on an edge. An edge is actually an ecosystem too. So that's where the water kind of meets the land. You've got animals that live in the water their whole lives, like fish, but then you've also got animals that live just on the outside of the water, say a red-winged blackbird that might be flying by. And then animals can do both, like salamanders and frogs. They start in the water, and then they become terrestrial or live on land later in their life. Wetlands have so many benefits as well. They can clean the water. These grasses here, those bulrushes and cattails, they actually pull the toxins out of the water. They pull the pollutants out to keep it healthy. So that's great news if there's a factory nearby that's putting pollutants into the water, and we get our drinking water from places like this. So we have these plants to thank for that. Now, wetlands are also fantastic places for birds to rest and nest. A lot of birds migrate through places like this. They find some food, like a pit stop. They say you're on a road trip or something. They'll get their food and then they'll take off where they need to go on their migration. And then birds return year after year to the same nesting sites, just like one that you can see out here in the pond. Well, that's something that a person built, and we invite birds to come and stay and nest there year-round. Now, wetlands also act like a sponge. If you've ever done any dishes at home, you probably have seen one of these or used one of these. A sponge's job is to hold water, and that's exactly what a wetland does. All that precipitation that we get goes right here. Now, if we didn't have wetlands like this, your cities and your towns, they would probably be flooded. So these wetlands hold a lot of the excess water that we can use year-round. Okay, now I want to play a game with you guys to help illustrate some of the connections that living things have to one another. All right, you guys ready to play the game with me? Here before me I have tons of living organisms as well as things that are not living that make up the wetland ecosystem. I am the sun. I connect all of these things in this ecosystem. And because I'm the sun, I'm going to give energy to this plant. In this case, the Baltic rush. Okay? Now there are animals that eat things that come from plants, like seeds. Straight across over there, I see a mouse. A mouse would love to feast on some of the Baltic rush seeds. Do you see anything in this area that might eat a mouse? The obvious choice, the snake, right? The snake would love to eat a mouse. Why not? If a snake does really well over the years, no matter how well it does, it will die. All animals do die at some point, and they decompose and basically turn back into soil. I see some soil way over there, so let's connect it to soil. And you can find fungus in soil, which helps to break things down. You can find decomposers like millipedes and worms. There's tons of great things in soil. But plants grow from soil, don't they? It's kind of like going back to the start. But there's another plant over here I want to introduce you to. This is the cottonwood tree, which you can find tons of around wetlands. They like having a lot of water around. And plants, they release oxygen when they photosynthesize. Can you think of any animals that need oxygen? All of them. Like us, right? We're animals. Humans need plants. So we're part of the wetland ecosystem too. I'm going to connect humans to the dragonfly over here, which is an insect. You're probably wondering, what? I don't eat dragonflies. But dragonflies do eat an insect that you're not a big fan of, mosquitoes. Mosquitoes can actually carry diseases to make us sick. Dragonflies feast on those guys. So we're pretty grateful to have dragonflies around. A dragonfly larva and eggs are laid in water, which is right over here. tons of different macroinvertebrates, like insects, the dragonfly over there. They can be found in water for most of their lives. But all living things need water to survive. Right next to water over here, we've got an animal that never leaves the water. Fish. I love fish. So do great blue herons. They love fish too. They'll stand really, really still and wiggle their toes until a fish comes along, tries to bite that toe. Heron's got itself a meal. Okay, to break that fish down in its stomach, it's got some special acids, which you also have. It's got bacteria to help break it down. Good bacteria. And that bacteria also helps to create soil, and it can be found in the soil too. So what do we have here? It's not quite a food chain, is it? This is a food web. You can see how organisms like the great blue heron and humans are connected in this food web. You can see how the snake and the dragonfly are connected. You would never put those two together, right? But when it comes to the web, they are still interconnected. Now I want us to take a minute and think, what would happen if we took one of these things out? Okay, I want you to imagine that it's a hot summer night and you feel some itching on your shoulder. Oh, mosquito just bit you. Go grab your spray, spray yourself up. Yeah, no more mosquitoes are gonna bite you, right? Go jump into a local wetland or something, go for a swim. All that stuff you just sprayed on you is now toxin in the wetland. So that might kill some of the mosquitoes in there, might also kill some of the dragonflies that are in the wetland. What do you think would happen if we took mosquitoes and dragonflies out of that wetland ecosystem? Do you think anything else would be affected by that? Have a look. Look what happened. Our ecosystem begins to fall apart even when you just take one of these organisms out of it. Now, humans, which are responsible for some of these things, can also bring good to wetlands, right? They can help to restore habitat. They can put in those nests that you saw earlier at the Nature Center, Arrowhead Pond. We can also do things to help improve wetland ecosystems as well. So wetlands are fantastic ecosystems, as they all are, that we need to take good care of. When you get a chance, come on out to the Ogden Nature Center and come visit our wetlands, or just go out for a walk wherever you are and think about the ecosystem you're in and all the living things that depend on it. Thanks for studying with us, guys. See you next time.